The UN says it's just received permission to send around 100 aid trucks into Gaza as Israel loosens its blockade of the Palestinian territory under international pressure. A first group of 5 trucks carrying humanitarian supplies, including baby food, crossed into Gaza early on Tuesday through the Kerem Shalom crossing. Israel had previously blockaded all food, medicine, and other aid from reaching Gazans for nearly 3 months. France's foreign minister called that shipment insufficient. Well, as those limited deliveries get underway, France joined the United Kingdom and Canada in condemning Israel's new offensive in Gaza, putting further pressure on Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In a joint statement, the 3 countries said, "We will not stand by while the Netanyahu government pursues these egregious actions. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions in response." For more, we're joined now by DW correspondent Emily Gordine in Jerusalem. Emily, the UN just announced that it received permission to send around 100 aid trucks into Gaza. What more can you tell us?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to say here to be very careful with this number, because yesterday the UN was told that 9 of its trucks had been approved to enter Gaza. In the end, only 5 were able to enter. So we will have to wait and see how many trucks actually managed to get in today. And I think it's also important to say here that 100 trucks is not nearly as much as aid organizations would like to see get in. I was speaking to a spokesperson from UNRWA earlier, and he was saying that it needs at least 500 trucks a day to meet the needs on the ground that are so dire. And of course, there is also a question of how will aid progress. Currently, the UN has 900 trucks waiting at the crossings with Gaza, but it is in fact the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that is supposed to be in charge of aid distribution. This is a foundation that was set up by the US and Israel to facilitate aid distributions, because they say that the UN and other aid organizations have not managed to prevent Hamas from getting their hands on aid in the past. However, this organization is not up and running yet, and in the meantime, it looks as if traditional aid organizations are having to step in to fill the gaps.
Meanwhile, Israel is continuing its ground offensive in Gaza. Emily, give us an update on the situation on the ground there.
Yes, Israeli strikes overnight and into today killed about 60 people, according to local health authorities. This comes after the IDF issued evacuation orders from northern and central Gaza yesterday. Over the weekend, the Israeli army launched an expansion of its military operation called Gideon's Chariots. And this is in line with what the cabinet had decided a couple of weeks ago. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came out yesterday saying that Israel would take full control of Gaza. All of this despite calls from the international community to end the war in Gaza, and also despite what much of the Israeli public would like to see, which is an end to the war and the release of the hostages. Now, all of this is happening as negotiations in Doha are underway. However, we are hearing that they seem to still be at an impasse, and there is no progress whatsoever at this point.
Emily, thank you very much. Our correspondent in Jerusalem, Emily Gordine.
Gaza under siege. Israeli airstrikes pummeling the Strip. Israel calls its operation Gideon's Chariots, an expanded offensive with the official goal of destroying Hamas and freeing all remaining hostages.
We are going to take control over all areas of the Strip. This is part of defeating Hamas, in parallel with the tremendous military pressure.
Gaza was already one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Since the beginning of the war, Israel has pushed Gazans into less and less space. First came so-called buffer zones, occupied by the military to keep Israel safe from militant attacks. Israel took control of the Philadelphia corridor in the south, along the border with Egypt, and then occupied 2 more corridors, the Morag and Netzarim, cutting Gaza into pieces. That makes it extremely difficult for Gazans to get from one part of the Strip to another. Now it's instructed Gazans to leave the striped areas marked here leaving only a small portion of the Strip for Gazans to actually live in. Israel's military has told Gazans to gather in safe zones like the Al-Masawi camp. However, even those zones have come under fire. Within Israel, the maximalist strategy is popular among hardliners like Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who has suggested destroying Gaza and driving its people out. On the other side, protesters call for Israel to make a deal with Hamas to release the remaining hostages. It's not clear if the aim to control all of Gaza is short-term or a long-term strategy. After a year and a half of war and over 50,000 dead, including thousands of Hamas fighters, Israel still hasn't been able to destroy the group. But Gazans are paying the price, with no safe place left to go.
Let's look at these latest developments with Marina Miron. Marina's a military analyst from the Defence Studies Department at King's College London. Welcome back to DW, Marina. So we have Britain, Canada and France condemning Israel's actions and threatening further concrete actions in response. What sort of reaction do you think they might be referring to?
Good evening, Phil. The problem here is that, of course, in rhetoric, the UK, Canada and France can condemn Israel, but realistically speaking, they don't have any levers in order to influence Israel or in order to make Netanyahu stop. What I can imagine is that they will be going through international organizations to exert diplomatic pressure, especially diplomatic pressure on the United States, because the United States remains a key player in supporting Israel. And even now, the U.S. position is shaky, as has been shown by the cancellation of J.D. Vance's visit to Israel planned for tomorrow. So therefore, these three countries will most likely go the diplomatic route because essentially Israel depends on the U.S. Military aid, and this is probably a point of pressure that they will try to pursue.
Right, OK. Meanwhile, the Israeli military, the IDF, is warning of what they call an unprecedented attack on Khan Yunis. Every time we see pictures of Gaza, all we're seeing is rubble. What will an unprecedented attack, what is that likely to look like?
Well, to be honest, I have no idea, because it depends on what we take as a benchmark here, what an unprecedented attack might look like. It seems to me that this announcement is more of a psychological nature in order to create fear amongst those Hamas fighters who are in Khan Yunis. I imagine that there will be airstrikes, ground troops will be used, but how it will be, I think it will be a large-scale operation, but how it will differ from previous attacks using more bombs or something like that, it's open to interpretation, because, as I said, what do we use as a benchmark to compare it?
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel will take control of all of the Gaza Strip. Is that achievable militarily?
Well, it is problematic because what is happening is that the IDF, by conducting its large-scale operation in Gaza, is creating essentially a hostile population. So, yes, you can have military control, but at what cost and to what end? The whole idea here is that Israel is fighting a violent non-state actor, and if we look at history of such wars, usually the effort was to try to separate the population from the violent non-state actor at hand and try to offer some sort of incentives to the population to win hearts and minds, to coin the phrase. And here this is not happening, even with a few UN trucks now arriving in Gaza. This is not the case. So the problem is that even if Israel controls Gaza militarily, it will have that hostile population, and the seeds for a new rise of what might be a second iteration of Hamas, or the third iteration of Hamas, are already laid. And so the problem here is not going to be solved militarily. And besides, Can Israel afford that? Who is going to pay for it? And what about other regional actors who are interested in preserving Hamas in Gaza, such as the Houthis, for one, or Hezbollah in Lebanon?
Thank you for that, Marina. A military analyst at Marina Miron from King's College London.